Good morning, everyone. I guess it's actually the afternoon now on this Thursday, April 9th. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Lehman. I'm the marketing team lead at Fishbowl Solutions. And as part of our continuing Oracle Web Center Tips and Tricks webinar series, today we're going to be talking about how Web Center workflows can help you stay productive while working from home. Based on the poll results of the poll I launched, looks like most of you are using workflows within Web Center. So the focus of today's webinar and a key takeaway or that tip and trick we're providing is how, if you're not an administrator or power user, really how simple it is to go into Web Center and create an ad hoc workflow or create a workflow for any of your content-centric business processes. I'm happy to be joined today by my colleague Tom Johnson, who's really our subject matter expert with workflows and Oracle Web Center content. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Jason.
Thanks for joining us today. Here's our agenda for today's webinar. Before I go through the items we're going to cover, I just wanted to cover off on a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, so anyone that did register for the webinar will be sent a recording within a couple days after today's webinar. Also, I wanted to just mention that this is a continuing webinar series. So Fishbowl's trying to provide Web Center related information out to our customers monthly. We had our first webinar in February. This is kind of continuing that series and the tips and tricks theme. This is part one of the workflow webinar. We will continue part two next Thursday. And I'll have a little bit more information at the end of today's webinar on where you can go to register. So with that, let's dive into today's topic. So I'm going to start off by giving just a quick Fishbowl overview. I'll also kind of cover off on some of those work from home challenges. So one of the things we wanted to one of the things we wanted to make sure everyone understood is, we understand that, obviously, it's a unique situation right now with most people working from home. So as we considered the tips and tricks series, we wanted to provide more relevant content for those people that are working from home. So how could Web Center help with that? And we thought workflow would be a great topic for that. So again, getting back to the agenda, we're going to focus on that tip and trick around workflow today and how it can help you stay productive. So most of you on the line today are going to be familiar with workflows. So not really a lot of new, what is a workflow? We'll cover off on the different types of workflows and what's included with Web Center. But really the value that we think most people will get out of this today is Tom is going to actually walk you through the process of creating a workflow, showing you the various steps that are involved, what's needed to get it configured, how you create notifications for the workflows, how you add people. And he's basically going to do that in about 15 minutes. So again, just showing you that that's available. And as you're considering other ways to stay productive and keep content-centric business processes moving, Web Center workflows could be leveraged to do just that. So that'll be the demo portion. We'll conclude with a summary and some questions. So a quick overview of Fishbowl Solutions. So really our goal is to help customers solve their costly and frustrating knowledge sharing problems. Since 1999, we've been working with Oracle Web Center, specializing in enterprise content management and portal solutions, really trying to help organizations better manage, retain, and distribute content through enhanced desktop and mobile experiences. We also help organizations leverage Oracle Content Experience Cloud, focusing on developing omni-channel experiences for the digital content. Most recently, we've been developing mobile applications and creating digital assistants or chatbots for customer and employee service and sales enablement using Oracle's Mobile Cloud Hub. And to help you find all that high-value content within your organization, we provide enterprise search software and services for both on-premise and cloud-based use cases, leveraging Mindbreeze and Google Cloud. So working from home, a lot of challenges. Some of you on the line might actually have been working from home for a while. You kind of have it down. But I think we all understand that, it's a unique situation now caused by the coronavirus. So some of us are new to working from home. That actually includes me. I go to the office every day. So had a few hiccups initially, but kind of getting the feel for it. But that doesn't mean that working from home is not going to be absent of challenges going forward. So just had a list here of various things that, we're probably all familiar with when it comes to working from home. We work too much. It's hard to separate when we start work, when we end work, because we don't really have to commute anymore. We could work at any time. I think prioritization is something to consider, what tasks to work on first, making sure that you are prioritizing your tasks. You don't have anyone looking over your shoulder anymore. So it's really about that self-motivation to get your work done. A lot of interruptions. I just had one. I don't know if you were able to hear it, but I'm in my basement giving this presentation today, and the basement door opened. So sorry for that. But again, there's a lot of opportunity, or there's a lot of interruptions that can occur: the doorbell, the dog, TV, so on and so forth. Loneliness can also be a thing. So it's also important when you consider how content can help, and content-centric business processes can help other people, be engaged and be engaged in the management of that content. And I'm going to come back to number 5 on communication issues. I think it's probably the most relevant as we consider the topic today, workflow and workflow processes. If you also consider technology hiccups, I'm sure, for some of you having more conference calls, solutions like Zoom and WebEx have definitely added more users over the last few weeks. So putting a strain on their systems, or your VPN might crash. So we're all dealing with all these things, including, not eating the right foods when we should. So as we consider back to number 5, so communication issues. So as part of working from home now, there's probably a lot more reliance on email. Again, most organizations are probably using a collaboration system like Slack or others, or Microsoft Teams. So there's ways to augment some of that email. But it seems like as you consider how email is so prevalent today, it probably becomes even more prevalent. Where that becomes a problem is if you're asking for others to provide feedback and review on some of the content that's being created. And really that content that's the high value, that needs to move through a process, needs to be reviewed and approved by certain people. And if you're relying on email now to do that, for any of that content review, sometimes that processes can be bottlenecked by email, where you're going back through emails to try to find the right attachment of the version that everyone the first author is looking for other people to review. And so there's just a lot of issues where you don't have the right version, you're not sure who has the ball, and where the process needs to go from there. And then it really becomes, if you're relying on email too much for approving some of that content, is the inability to really audit what's getting done. So you might know who you sent the email to and asked for review, but then you don't know where it really goes from there. So that could be a big problem, especially if content gets published, content that contains errors, wrong sales term or pricing. That could lead to lost relationships with customers, or even fines, especially for highly regulated organizations. So how can content-based workflows help? In terms of the value that workflow provides, you can leverage workflows to provide more consistent and timely communication when content needs to be reviewed by you or any members of your team. Workflows can be configured, and you can leverage the system-generated notifications that come out of a content management system to provide that communication on a clear next step that the person needs to take. Also, if you've defined your workflow processes, you can also get to, what are our achievable outcomes? What are we trying to achieve, and by when? So kind of having that process down and using workflow to help you achieve those outcomes, instead of, well, we don't know how long it's going to take, because again, we're relying on email to try to get through, the content review and publishing process or release process within the system. So on the previous slide, I mentioned loneliness and being disengaged, as we're all working from home now. So this is an opportunity to really look at workflow to include other people within the organization as part of a workflow review process. So other people that could add value, even from a review process, getting them involved so that they can kind of see where they fit in the process and the value that they're providing to get content published and through the system. You can also reduce bottlenecks and inconsistencies, because the thing with workflow is you should know who has, what step it's in, who are the people at that step, what they need to do to advance that workflow item to the next step to get content published. So you should be able to cut down on the amount of bottlenecks and inconsistencies in the content review that you have. And then really it comes down to accountability. So, because you know who's involved and you can go in and see, and you can work with your team, your admin or whatever, to see whose step it's at, and to understand, that person, what they need to do. You can always just point back to, these are the people involved in the process and they're accountable for each step. So there should be very clear how everyone is helping get those workflow items through the system. So with a little background there, I'm now going to turn it over to Tom.
All right, thank you, Jason. So yeah, let's start with, kind of what is that workflow? What, why does it exist, and what process does it follow? So essentially, the definition of a workflow is really it specifies the route content needs to take, review, approval, before it's released into the system. And so for the purposes of our webinar, and we're dealing with Oracle WebCenter content. So, the workflow starts by defining and mapping out your process. So, what content items need to go through workflow and why, and, when does that workflow process start? Is it with, a new revision? Is it a brand new content item coming into the system for the first time? And then you also need to consider the specific tasks for each step. How many people need to approve this on each step? Are you looking for the individuals to just approve or reject the content? Or are you looking for them to add additional pieces to the content itself? And then additionally, who is involved? Who are the people that need to take action on this item before it's released into the system? There are a couple different types of workflow. Before we get into the WebCenter side, I think it's also important to understand the differences between a more business process management workflow versus the content-centric. And essentially, there's the business process management model. Workflows are very common within, say, accounts payable to help get invoices paid, or get employees reimbursed from company expenses. There are typically a lot more rules involved within BPM workflows, such as an invoice of a certain dollar amount is going to go to, say, a manager or director, or invoices from, say, a specific vendor are going to go to a different queue. So things like that. But for the purpose of our demo, we're going to go ahead and focus on the WebCenter content-based workflows, which involve reviewing the actual content item itself. They're usually a little simpler, and it's typically not too many steps. Usually within 3. And say, for an example, you could say new marketing content needs to get reviewed before it's published and either then available for consumption on, say, your website, or to be used in a brochure or something along those lines. So here, in terms of available workflows inside WebCenter, there are 2 different types. There's the basic and the criteria. The basic we'll kind of not really focus on. It's not used very often, and it's kind of manually initiated. But we'll focus on the criteria workflow. And so on the criteria side, you have specific criteria based on the metadata of the item, and things like that. Those things trigger the actual workflow itself. And so here we kind of talk about the different types of steps inside in WebCenter. So these are essentially the different options you have for each step in a workflow. You have the auto contribution. So this is when someone checks it in. There's this kind of initial step that if the item gets rejected back, it's going to go to that author who originally checked it in. to take action on. There's also the just review step. This is essentially just having users approve or reject it. They're not going to, check it out and add any content to it or anything like that. It's really just approval or rejection. And then the next two are pretty similar. So there's the review with the edit of the revision. If something needs to get added to the content item, the user assigned to a step like this can check it out and edit the actual revision there. And it'll just stay on that revision versus review with new revision. Here, if you do a checkout check-in with the new content item that has the updates, it's actually creating a new revision that kind of takes the place of the original one. And so after everything's released, you still have that original version as a revision. It's just not going to be the latest. So it's not going to get consumed, but it's there to kind of hold a record of the changes throughout the workflow. And then contribution step is essentially kind of a step in which you can edit the file. So here quickly, kind of just talking about determining the reviewers on a workflow. So you can have, in the admin applet, you can assign these workflow steps to specific named users. So you can manually have those in there. You can also assign a workflow step to an alias, so a group of users. Say you have, a sales team that needs to look at something, you can assign it to that whole group if you have that alias set up in WebCenter. And then there's also something called tokens, in which I'll dive into deeper in our demo, but essentially you can have essentially a script that can pull information out of the metadata. And so that can be pretty powerful, and you can take advantage of inputs that users are putting when they're checking the items in. Okay, so here's a simple kind of one-step workflow process. It's essentially the user checks in the document. These are the reviewers assigned, and then after the correct actions are taken and approved, it's going to then get released into the system. So here is a two-step workflow. So it's got a little bit of logic in it. The document is going to get added, and it matches the criteria for the criteria of workflow. And then there's a check. So does the document get checked in by the administrator? If so, it'll go right to being reviewed by the reps from the impacted organization sites programs. If it didn't get checked in by the admin, it first goes to that document administrator for review before going to that second step. And then there's the review for publishing after it gets through that before it's then released into the system. So before I get into the demo, I'll just give a little overview of what you'll see. So I'm going to create an ad hoc workflow, and I'll determine the criteria of what's going to get checked in or what's going to trigger this workflow, as well as I'm going to be pulling the assigned users from metadata fields, and I'm going to use tokens to do that. And then I'll check an item into workflow, and we'll kind of see how it acts essentially in workflow. So here's my environment. It's pretty basic right now. So I have this one profile called training documents. And on this profile, there's just a little bit of metadata, but on the bottom here, you'll see these three metadata fields, which are pertaining to our workflow. So this is what's going to drive who gets assigned and things like that. So first, this is going to be, the first step is I'm going to set up to be a review and edit. So users this is going to be the first step, and users here can check out the item and check it back in with edits. For this second step, what I'm going to do is just an approve step, so they can review it and either approve or reject it. Those are going to be the two actions that they can take. And then this third one is users to notify of release. So this could be pretty useful. You can put an alias in here of, say, the user group that this document pertains to. So after all of the workflow actions happen and, this document gets approved, it can then notify a larger group of users. And so these three fields are just text fields. So they're just simple inputs that I put on this profile and gave labels to. And you could, say you have a lot of users that you want to add, you could, make this long text or something to be able to handle larger groups. But for now, this is just text. And then why don't we jump over to the admin applets, and I will open the workflow admin applet, and we'll get started with our demo here, or our creation of the workflow. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create those workflow tokens. And so I'm going to create 3 different ones, one pertaining to each metadata field. And I'll kind of walk through the script to better explain what everything's doing. But once you're in the workflow applet, you can see at the top left under options, there's tokens. And so let's get to adding them. So the first one I'm going to add is workflow step 1 token is what I'm going to call it. I'll assign it to the workflow step 1. And here's my script. And I'll make this bigger so you can see it. And I'll just kind of walk through it. So essentially what I'm doing is grabbing the value that's going to get put in the X workflow step 1 user field. So this is the name of that field I was showing you on the profile. And I just assign that to a variable called field, so it's a little easier to read. What I then do is create a result set on that. So essentially you can put a comma-separated list of users and aliases in this metadata field, and it'll break those up, and then it's going to loop over each one. And here's a quick check to see if it's a user that you added into the field. So it'll then assign this user. So workflow add user is the function for adding a user to the workflow step. And then if it's not a user, then it attempts to add it as an alias. So it's a pretty simple loop here that you can kind of add to get the information out of that metadata field. And one thing to note too, so this is IDOC script. This is what WebCenter uses. It's kind of an Oracle scripting language. So the syntax is a little different than something you might see, but it's pretty straightforward. So this is going to be our first token. I'm going to create the other 2. They're very similar. So this one's just going to, the only difference is it's going to use this field. And let's add the last one. So users to notify, it's going to grab it from the 3rd metadata field that we added. So now that I have my tokens created, we're then able to add our workflow. So I'm going to call this training ad hoc workflow. I'm going to, go to the criteria workflows. Sorry about that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off the public security group, and then my criteria down here, I'm going to trigger off the profile that I'm using. And so that is the training profile. So now let's add our workflow steps. I'm going to just call them step 1. So for this one, I'm going to say you can review and edit. So replace that revision with changes, and then I'm going to select my workflow 1 token. That's all you have to do for that step. It's pretty simple. For step 2, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to do just review, select my 2nd token. And the one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to, the last step is going to be just a notify step. So I don't actually want it to notify the users assigned to that step that there's work to be done, since I'm going to just exit the step and notify everyone that's released and approved. So I'm adding this IDOC script value here. in the exit step so that it doesn't send that notification. And then my last one is going to be called notification step. And I'll add this last one here. And then on enter of this workflow, I'm going to put some IDOC script to send the message essentially. So I'm setting the email subject saying the item is released, and then I'm grabbing the users assigned to this step, and then I'm going to notify them. And then this is IDOC script here to just exit the workflow. So I can turn this on now, and let's quick check in the item. So I'm going to check in some VPN training material. So if you're, working from home and there's a change to your VPN manual, and you need people to get assigned to that or get a notification for that after it gets approved, I'm going to have a workflow for that. So I'm assigning the first one to myself here. I'm actually just logged in as WebLogic, one of the admins. So first it's going to go to myself to make sure everything's good and doesn't need any more edits. Next, I'm going to assign it to the admin group to approve or reject it. And then last, here's the training group alias, which needs to get notified that the item has cleared workflow and there's a new information for it. So here you can see on the content information page, it's now in workflow. I'm going to pull over this other browser I have here that I'll log into with my user. I'm going to go to my workflow assignments. You can see here, and I'm going to say everything looks good. Let's approve it through. So now it'll be in step 2. So step 2 is assigned to the training admins, and in this case, I have the WebLogic user as someone who needs to approve it. And so here I will approve. And so now you can see it actually got cleared from workflow, and I can show you some of the notifications here. So here's one where the user is getting assigned to step 1. You can click on the link to go into the review pane to approve or reject it. And then here is the second one, getting assigned to step 2. So you can kind of see how users are going to get notified when they need to take action. And from an earlier example, here's also a reject email. So if the item got rejected from workflow, it's getting assigned to a different step. It'll show you who's rejected by, and here's a message saying, what needs to change. So a user could then get that information and then take the correct action, get it checked in correctly, send it through, get approved. And then here is an example of the notification step at the end. You can see up here it's saying to the users that were in that alias, notification of release. You can customize what this message says, but VPN training is the item. And so this is just saying, and here's a link to the content information page, so you can then go view that item. So as far as the demo goes, that's really what I wanted to show us. It's really easy to, you could have an existing profile that you just add these 3 metadata fields to, or maybe your use case only needs, 1 or 2 of them, and then pretty simple to then just add a criteria workflow that triggers based on that profile or any other metadata that you might need. And you can then assign these workflow steps to the users or aliases in those metadata fields. With that, I will pass it back to Jason.
Thanks, Tom. So very quickly, Tom was able to show you in about 10 minutes how to create another workflow to involve other people in the process, to create the necessary steps and notification. So again, the purpose of today's webinar is to really show you that if you're considering other ways to get content, reviewed by people, approved through your system, and then notify your entire organization, for example, a workflow can definitely lead that. So just as we're all dealing with a lot of very unique circumstances now, how could workflow really help you as part of your content governance model? Consider other ways, other content that your organization is creating, and how workflows can really help that content move through the system, make sure that it's accurate, and get distributed to the right people. So I'd again encourage you, we're a little bit over time here today. We appreciate everyone sticking with us. I would definitely encourage you to sign up for the part 2 of this webinar. We're going to go into a little bit more, if you will, advanced settings within workflow and the out-of-the-box workflow capabilities within WebCenter, as well as to show you the ways that the workflow processes can be enhanced using one of our value-add solutions called Workflow Solution Sets. So we're keeping that landing page on our website going. Just simply go to that page. You can sign up for next week's webinar and any following webinars. All right, everyone. Well, we want to encourage you, if there's other information you're looking on workflow and how Fishbowl could help you with workflows or anything WebCenter related, please go to our website, check us out on social media. We will be in touch with more information on webinars that we have planned for the future. We hope everyone's staying safe. Until next time, thank you for attending.